We no longer have E3, but we still had a busy weekend in June where hundreds of game studios and publishers came together to throw a bunch of gaming news at the world. Sony avoided all the noise by holding their State of Play event in late May, and Nintendo avoided the noise by not yet announcing their Direct Showcase, which is still scheduled to be held in June. But everyone else opted to use the second week of June to showcase their games, and there are literally hundreds of game trailers and teasers to go through. In this video, I have handpicked 30 games that I felt were worth mentioning for various reasons. Highlighting only these 30 games means I have left behind hundreds of other games, and I had to do that simply because my head couldn't process any more news. I'm skipping some big titles like Indiana Jones, the Starfield DLC, the new World of Warcraft expansion, Metal Gear Solid Delta, the new Diablo 4 expansion, and many interesting indie games, most of which certainly seem promising. But that's the fun of curating your personal list. You get to make your own choices and let your head focus only on those few titles because no one can keep up with all of the news. So here are some of the highlights of the games showcased across various events held in June 2024. We begin with LEGO Horizon Adventures, the very first game showcased at the Summer Game Fest. It seems like a light-hearted take on the often serious Horizon games, but still includes fighting robot animals, so the core of the franchise is still there. It also has you collecting a lot of shiny things, so the core of the LEGO games franchise is also still there. 2023's best-selling game Hogwarts Legacy didn't include the sport of Quidditch, and we now know why. Harry Potter Quidditch Champions is a game that focuses entirely on the flying sport and seems to actually feature characters from the Harry Potter timeline, unlike Hogwarts Legacy. Interestingly, the game has already been announced to be part of the PlayStation Plus catalog on day one. That's a strange choice because this game is sure to be another bestseller based on the brand name alone. Neva is the next game from Nevada Games, whose first game, Grease, won the hearts of people worldwide. Similar to Grease, Neva seems to rely on its art to tell the story rather than gameplay or dialogues, although this game is an action-adventure, so there is some combat involved. Then we saw yet another trailer for Black Myth: Wukong, which is coming out 4 years after it was first announced. While I wish the very best to the developers, I feel that the market currently has way too many Souls-like games coming out in a short span of time, and a lot of them look interesting. But the hype generated for this game back in 2020 has been strong enough to maintain interest 4 years later, so I'm sure it will have excellent sales in its launch window. Dear and Boy seems like another indie game that uses a cute animal to tug at your heartstrings. But at least they chose an animal that isn't used often in games, a deer. The game describes itself as a cinematic platformer and that the deer will grow throughout the story, which adds something new to the cute animal game formula. Kingdome Come Deliverance 2 is a story-driven action RPG set in 15th century Bohemia. The first game was a critically acclaimed title, although it is also considered to be an underrated game. So expectations are quite high for this sequel. Unknown 9 Awakening is an ambitious action-adventure game that is part of a larger narrative that has grand plans to tell its story across various formats like video games, podcasts, comic books, and novels. I'm not sure about how the video game will be received, but personally speaking, if I am presented with such an ambitious project that requires me to follow multiple formats to know the full story, I'd rather not start the story at all in the first place. The First Descendant has a marketing problem. It doesn't seem to want to tell the world that it is a free-to-play game, and I don't know why. The most recent trailer revealed the release date, and I was almost impressed that it didn't have a pre-order now message, only to realize later that it was a free-to-play game. That immediately raises a few red flags, but at least it lowers the entry barrier for anyone who wants to try this new looter shooter. Next, a quick mention about two old games which are in the news because they are coming to consoles. New World is an MMO from Amazon Games that showed a lot of promise but didn't quite reach the heights that it was aiming for. Now it is coming up with a new expansion called Aeturnum, which is also simultaneously releasing on consoles. Then we have Valorant, the competitive shooter from Riot Games that was exclusive to PC until now. This one is a more curious choice for a console port, but I guess both these games are trying to tap into a new audience in order to increase brand awareness, which they can then leverage in other media like TV shows and movies. Anyway, this piece of news is proof that the console market is still valuable enough for studios to consider a multi-platform release for their games. Hyper Light Breaker is launching in early access later this year. I'm only following this game due to the No-Clip documentary series. Having seen the behind-the-scenes story of the studio, I am eager to see what they bring to the table with this open-world roguelite game. Screenbound is an innovative platformer that claims to be the first 5D game, where you play in both 2D and 3D at the same time. It seems like a gimmick, but at the very least it's a very clever gimmick, and it's also technically impressive. We still don't have a lot of information on what will actually happen in the game beyond this gimmick, but this is certainly a title worth keeping an eye on. While Waiting builds on a very simple idea. What would you do differently to avoid waiting for things to happen? The game tries to teach you that there are no shortcuts in life, but that doesn't mean we can't try to find one. Part visual novel and part puzzle game, While Waiting features 100 levels or puzzles in which you can either choose to do nothing and simply clear the level, or try to find an alternate solution and inevitably fail. Doom: The Dark Ages is a new take on the popular FPS franchise. It retains the sci-fi flavor but adds in a medieval setting, telling the origin story of the protagonist. It all seems quite weird but also seems like an exciting direction for the hit series. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 is notable for being the first title in the series to launch on day one with Xbox Game Pass. The majority of the franchise's player base is on PlayStation, but since the Game Pass launch also includes a PC version, it will be interesting to see if this will affect sales figures, that is, if the figures are announced at all in the first place. When this trailer first came up, I thought it was for some new 5v5 hero shooter, but it turned out to be Dragon Age: The Veilguard, which is supposed to be the next entry in the popular RPG series. It's certainly an intentional style for the trailer, but it wasn't well received by the community. The art style in general has been called out to be too cartoonish and a departure from what the series has always looked like. Clair Obscur Expedition 33. This game caught my eye only due to its fresh-looking turn-based combat system. Apart from that, it looks like a standard RPG, inviting you to explore a beautiful world and fight monsters along the way. South of Midnight is a third-person action-adventure title from Compulsion Games, the makers of We Happy Few. Featuring an interesting traversal system and a really cool art style, this game seems like a perfect adventure to check out on Xbox Game Pass. Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn is a Souls-like game releasing day one on Game Pass. It is full of magic and promises a lot of action. With the Elden Ring DLC coming out in June, Flintlock in July, and Black Myth: Wukong in August, Souls-like fans have a busy 3 months coming up. Perfect Dark is a reboot of the popular action series from the early 2000s. Earlier this year, it was reported that this project was not going too well, and the gameplay trailer shown recently might have been promising. But we still don't have a release date for this game, not even a year, so it is best to be cautiously optimistic about this one for now. Fable is another reboot of an old series from the early 2000s. While we got an impressive looking cinematic trailer, we still have very few details about this action RPG. All we do know is that the game is expected to come out sometime next year. Winter Burrow proves that developers haven't run out of animals to use as main characters. This time, you play as a mouse as you try to survive a harsh winter. The game combines survival mechanics with a charming story. Mixtape is a musical adventure game that narrates the story of three teenagers who don't seem quite ready to grow up. The trailer seemed interesting, but I wonder what's going to happen to the game if it has licensed all the music used in it for a limited period of time. Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is the next installment in the flying franchise that is now more than 40 years old. This time, apart from just letting you fly planes, there are also some flying-based careers that you can simulate, like flying commercial flights, aerial firefighting, transporting cargo and VIPs, and so on. The Life is Strange series has had an interesting set of characters, but everyone always remembers the original. Double Exposure brings back Max from the original game, who is now much older and whose time powers have evolved into something more powerful. Stepping in and out of parallel dimensions, Max tries to solve a murder mystery to save her friend. The latest trailer for Avowed showed us a bit more of its story, followed by a separate deep dive in a video podcast. This magical fantasy RPG still feels a bit too generic and similar to Skyrim, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth a look. The official website briefly displayed the release date to be in November before changing it to just 2024 as shown in the trailer, so the actual release date for this game might still be undecided. Gears of War E-Day was a surprise announcement at the Xbox showcase. There were rumors of a new Gears of War game, but everyone thought it would be a sequel to Gears 5. Instead, we're getting a prequel to the first game, which is also fine, I guess. What remains to be seen is if the market will still appreciate the slow-paced gameplay of this franchise. Assassin's Creed Shadows got a gameplay trailer showcasing the contrasting playstyles of the two protagonists. Yasuke the samurai favors a direct approach, attacking as a brute, while Naoi the shinobi uses a stealth approach that is more in line with the Assassin's franchise. There really wasn't anything groundbreaking shown here, but the simple fact that people have been asking for an AC game set in Japan for many years is enough to guarantee that this game will sell millions of copies at launch. Anger Foot has been teased by Devolver Digital for a long time, and this year they finally came up with a release date. You can start kicking your enemies with a variety of footwear starting on July 11th. Star Wars Outlaws got a long look at its gameplay, and what seems to have most people impressed is its scope and technical features. The biggest win seems to be that you can transition from flying in space to landing on a planet without having to resort to a loading screen like Starfield infamously did last year. They are two separate games with two separate systems, of course, but small details like these do make a difference to the casual audience. The trailer showed off space and land combat, and it seems like a decent Star Wars adventure. Coming from the developers of the Sniper Elite and Zombie Army franchises, Atomfall seems a lot like Fallout, except it is set in 20th century Britain instead of a futuristic American city. The gameplay felt a bit generic and similar, but we may learn more about the game later. If all this felt like a lot, there's a whole lot more not shown here, and there's even more news to come throughout the rest of the month in the form of Nintendo Direct and a few more smaller showcases and individual game announcements. My suggestion would be to curate your own personal list and not feel too overwhelmed with the sheer volume of news coming out this month. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode.